Duh, hoi hoi. Yes, it's time for another sound design video, but before that, I have something incredibly relevant to talk to you about. Of course, we're starting off by talking about the micronation buried within the United States, the Republic of Molossia. You see, Molossia was initially created as the Grand Republic of Woodstein in 1977 and is now located in Dayton, Nevada. And before you ask, yes, they do have their own currency called the Valora, and it's pegged to something far better than the gold standard. The Molossian Valora is tagged to the price of cookie dough. The Pillsbury kind, to be specific. 5 Valora is worth 1 tube of Pillsbury cookie dough. Oh, and here's its president, Kevin Baugh. The capital city, and only city, which is just his house, is known as Boston. I love this so much. You may look at this micronation and say, well, this has to be fake, and you're right. No one recognizes this as a real official place, even though I'm a firm supporter and hope to join it one day as a citizen. But as sound designers, sometimes we need to focus on what's fake. We need to make soundscapes that don't belong in the real world, especially in genres like sci-fi and fantasy. And other times we need to do the opposite. We need to make stuff that sounds more realistic and grounded. So let's get into how to practice and think about this stylized, otherworldly, fake sound design and this more realistic, grounded sound design. So here's what we're going to be covering today. Part 1, stylized versus realistic sound. Part 2, how to start working with both types. And Part 3, my patented oppositional tone exercise to help your skills explode. So what is stylized and realistic sound design? Now, these aren't hard and fast terms that everybody in the industry uses, but I like to categorize them like this. On one end, you have realistic sound design, things that are more grounded in reality and common in films of all sorts, and games like The Last of Us, Gran Turismo, Red Dead Redemption 2, etc. And on the other end, we have stylized sound that doesn't necessarily always fit in the real world or even have any sort of basis in the real world. Games like Hollow Knight, Hades, Chicory, and many others have a lot of stylish sounds, especially for things that don't happen in reality, like huge magical ice spells or monster deaths. These sorts of sounds tend to be very processed and very out there. Most sound design falls somewhere in the middle. I guess you could call this realistish. Very rarely are we as sound designers making something so realistic that it perfectly emulates the real world, and very rarely are we making things so out there that there's absolutely no grounding in reality. It's a spectrum. Often even the more realistic games, movies, and shows have at least some stylization to them, even sports games. Sound designers need to at least understand both ends of this spectrum and understand what's useful and when to use what style. For example, Ben Burtt, the original sound designer of the Star Wars movies, is incredibly good at making both realistic and stylized sound effects and convincing us that the stylized sounds are realistic and belong in that world. But how do you start to gain that sort of understanding between stylized and realistic? Well, it comes from practice, of course. Yes, there's that P word, but here's how to keep it easy. First, take clips from any video game, movie, or media and cut that clip down to 5 seconds. Then strip that original audio within your DAW, basically any DAW can do this, and add your own sounds back in. What you'll want to do is find more realistic clips, like someone taking a footstep or opening a door, and design sounds for that. And then find more crazy over-the-top clips, like a Gundam blowing up or a huge spell being cast. Then design sounds for that. And of course, you can find clips that fall somewhere in between these extremes too. You'll notice that depending on whether you're skewing more realistic or more stylized, that your techniques will change, and you can look at my previous HMLS technique video and I'll show you how to kind of start thinking about this. And while this practice is awesome and doing one 5-second clip every single day, even if the results are garbage, will be monstrously helpful, there's one extra exercise to take this a little bit further. That's where the oppositional tone exercise comes in. But here's how it works. You do the same thing that you did in the previous exercise, finding stylish or realistic clips and designing sounds for them, but instead of designing stylized sounds for stylized clips and realistic sounds for realistic clips, you flip that around. Meaning that you are making stylish sounds for realistic clips and realistic sounds for stylish clips. Here's an example. Let's take this sword drawing example from Gundam Unicorn. Super short, ultra stylish. Let's make a sound that's dead-ass boring and not at all like it would fit in an anime. Let's make it more like a Hollywood realistic sword drawing. Now let's take another example. This gunshot from The Last of Us 2. Let's make it sound more sci-fi sounding. Now note how these sounded like absolute hot garbage? That's totally fine. In fact, your goal isn't to make these sounds good at all. The point of this exercise is to make you think more deeply about your sound choices, and it'll also help you realize what choices you're making in each scenario and make it more conscious to you. You'll become more aware of what exactly it takes to make a sound feel right in each context. Because it feels so wrong, you're far less likely to fall into standard patterns, and thus your practice will really sink in. And that sense you'll gain from these practice sessions is invaluable for any sound designer on the planet. But a cashew salted cinnamon brioche loaf, I hear you say, is it really so black and white when it comes to style versus realism? Absolutely not. There's infinite nuance to this, and some games may even have both style in some contexts and more realism in others. A game like Control is an excellent example of being both at the same time. This is simply a way to help you think about your sound design deeper, not a hard and fast rule set that you always have to follow. So let's go over what we talked about today. Number 1, some projects will err more towards stylish in their sound design needs, whereas some will skew more towards realism. But it's very rare that something is all the way stylish with no grounding in reality, or all the way realistic with absolutely no style put on top. And having an understanding on how to think of the two ends of the spectrum is immensely helpful to the skill of sound design. And you can use the oppositional tone exercise to get a really good sense of how to create sounds in each of these contexts. And as the last part of this summary, I shall one day become the new king of Molossia. While we may not be forming a fake country, we do need to focus on what's fake and what's real from time to time. That sense as sound designers is going to help us a lot and go a long way to make us better and better over time. And if you haven't already, be sure to watch my video on the HMLS technique right up here. This video will teach you how to layer and how to make sure your sounds sound thick and satisfying quicker with more confidence. All right, that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Go pet a dog.